Would you be my Mr. Dun 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 dun? I still got a lot of shit to learn.
So recently I was playing a game of Battlefield 1, and there was a moment in the match of operations that really piqued my interest. This moment was when the opposition was reinforced by a behemoth. To be more specific, the behemoth was a Zeppelin, which is one of the many classifications used to describe airships like this, but the main classification is referred to as a rigid airship. What really interested me was how in many instances the airship would set aflame quite easily, and when damaged enough, would descend directly to the ground to meet a very fire-engulfed and devastating demise. That simple fact is the reason I decided to begin to read up and research on this topic, and eventually share it with you. I was curious to find out the history of a rigid airship and its origin, and that's exactly what I did. It all began with a captain in the German army that went by the name of Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, who found himself acting within the Union Army of the American Civil War. The inspiration of the Zeppelin originated from one instance he took part in during the war. He had aided a soldier scout the area in an air balloon. It was here where he discovered his taste and fascination for flying in air travel. Less than a decade later, he attended a lecture concerning air travel, which became his basis for the first Zeppelin design, which took several decades of research to finally develop. This would come to be known as the LZ-1, which stood for the Luftship Zeppelin 1, which when translated to English is Zeppelin Airship 1. Before I continue, I must state that blimps were around before the invention of the rigid airship, but major differences are seen between them. These differences are that the Zeppelin has an internal metal framing surrounded by a fabric and consists of pockets of air, typically hydrogen or helium, that allows it to ascend and descend, whilst blimps have no metal framing and merely have a fabric that can be inflated or deflated, which allows it to float. The LZ-1, being the first design, was intended to be used for the military, as was many that followed it, as the creator of the Zeppelin was a military man, but it failed to impress the military even though it was very original and innovative at the time, because it flew a total of 3 times, suffering major damage on the first. This was looking like a bad start for the Zeppelin idea, but due to many investors funding the project as they had wanted to see it succeed, the LZ-1 was soon followed by the LZ-2. Immediately after its construction, it was damaged before flight due to an accident, but when it finally was ready to take off, it crashed and was taken apart. Even after these failures, the Zeppelin project persisted and gave way to the LZ-3, which had introduced the first remnants of succession for the rigid airship, as it flew for almost 2 hours, which exceeded expectations and was a major step forward at the time. This recent succession drew the attention of the German military, who had been impressed by this, and had told him that if he could make an airship fly for up to 24 hours at a time, they would be willing to purchase one. Yet the LZ-3 couldn't meet any of the given criteria that would allow it to surpass or reach 24 hours of flight needed. So the LZ-4 was soon introduced in an attempt to meet the military's needs. After the LZ-3, many investors had their eyes on the now promising project, so the LZ-4 was Zeppelin's first real chance of proving the airship's potential, so there were several major improvements made to this variation, such as an increased fuel capacity, allowing it not only to fly up to 24 hours, but it was estimated to be able to surpass 31 hours of flight. On August 4th, 1908, the LZ-4 had the chance they never got, and departed to fly across several major German cities, which drew the attention of over 40,000 people, yet due to its still mainly undeveloped state, it required much engine repairs and suffered many technical difficulties, eventually leading to its demise when it crashed into trees, setting it ablaze. Even though this ended in a major disaster, it saw many great strides in Zeppelin's project, and the reaction of the people was excitement, even though it eventually crashed. Due to this excitement, the people donated enough money to keep the Zeppelin project afloat, giving light to the LZ-5, which ultimately crashed. Due to this reaction, the business director Alfred Kosman saw its true potential in commercial business and transport, which soon became the Zeppelin's main purpose, rather than the military purpose it was aiming for. Zeppelin, being a military man, often expressed his dislikes of this new path the Zeppelin was taking. Due to this, Kosman would go on to make DLAG, standing for and I won't read it because I have a feeling I'd butcher that, which means German Airship Travel Corporation in English. What DLAG did is they commissioned Zeppelin to create airships to be used for commercial use. The first one to take on passengers was the LZ-7, Deutschland, which was destroyed due to the storm. The airship was carrying largely journalists, and surprisingly no one died in the crash, and for the first time the airship didn't burst into flames. Kolsman was finding himself in a bad situation, as the LZ-7 Deutschland was the only commercial airship available besides the LZ-6, which was constructed when Zeppelin was attempting to gain the military contract. For obvious reasons, the LZ-6 couldn't be used commercially, but after many alterations, it was finally fit to replace the LZ-7 Deutschland. The LZ-6 was able to go for a month before bursting into flames on the ground. The concept of an airship had not been diminished yet, as they introduced the Deutschland 2, which was caught by a large gust of wind during takeoff and ultimately destroying it. After many attempts, the DLAG program saw succession in the LZ-10, or more commonly known as the Schwaben, as it lasted over a year and transported over 1,500 passengers before following the undeniable pattern of many airships before it, and ultimately crashing, only injuring 30 passengers. From this point, many iterations were made, resulting in over 1,500 flights taking place before the start of the Great War, where many of the airships were commissioned into the German military in an attempt to aid the war effort, making DLAG obsolete for over a decade. During World War, many other nations saw this and began experimenting with the concept of an airship, but Germany saw the most succession, and even though many manufacturers were available, Zeppelin was the most popular. In the beginning of World War I, the Zeppelin gained military support by both the Army and the Navy, which used them for scouting across the ocean and aiding in the bombing of Britain. It is said that Zeppelins were not very effective machines, but their sheer size could have been used to scare Britain in an attempt to force them into surrender, which ultimately failed. Along with its benefits of its large size, there were many problems that arose with it, such as being a massive target for anti-aircraft guns. In order to avoid this, the Zeppelins would ascend higher into the air, which successfully avoided most of the anti-aircraft gunfire, but made the accuracy of the bombs dropped much worse, causing many of the bombs to miss its targets by entire cities, or just landing so far in the countryside it had little to no effect on Britain. There was no in-between for this, as if they flew lower, anti-aircraft guns and Allied aircraft could easily destroy them. Also, the Allies developed incendiary rounds, which were much more effective as it made it so the bombing runs by Zeppelins are more like suicide missions at this point. As you may know, Zeppelins are very, very fragile, and for many reasons. The main reason being is that they are easily combusted due to them being filled with hydrogen, which is a highly flammable gas. Helium was a much safer and optimal choice, but its limited supply made hydrogen much more realistic and affordable choice for the German army, which meant one incendiary round could kill an entire crew in a matter of seconds. At the end of the war, the airships were responsible for 557 deaths, which is a rather large number, until you take into perspective that 5,000 bombs were dropped, making it so that for every 10 bombs dropped, only one person would be killed. It was determined that airships were a horrible weapon of war, as they lost countless crews to the airship bombing runs during the war. After Germany's defeat, Zeppelins were banned from being made, even with the intent of commercial use. Any surviving airships were given to the Allies as compensation, and Zeppelin manufactured more airships for the Allies to keep the company afloat. By 1926, the ban of airships in Germany had ended, and from 1928, the golden age of airships had begun, as it offered trips across the Atlantic before aeroplanes were capable of such a large distance. This age introduced some of the best-known craft, such as the Graf Zeppelin, which offered trips around the world at 130 kilometers an hour or 80 miles an hour, and the Hindenburg, which was one of the largest airships that dwarfed many of the other crafts. Ironically, the Hindenburg was the same airship that demolished the airship industry overnight, when on its way to New Jersey, bursted into flames for unknown reasons, killing 36 people. Prior to this, there were other accidents with higher death tolls, but what differentiates them from the Hindenburg incident is that the Hindenburg was a commercial airship, which along with the countless media coverage, made it a lot worse. After this, the remaining airships were scrapped for parts at the start of World War II, and any history on airships from that point on speaks of blimps and semi-rigid airships, which lack a large portion of the metal framing. To sum it all up, the history of Zeppelins was a complete disaster, consisting of airships that were fragile and combusted more frequently than not. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.